Yo, what's going on, guys? So recently patch 0.9 came out for the beta of Last Epoch, which on top of a lot of balance changes and endgame improvements introduced multiplayer. I played Last Epoch a few times in the past, but never played it for too long, but since this is a pretty big patch and we are slowly getting close to the release, I decided to give it a proper shot. In this video I want to show you a build that I started with, which is Holy Trail Javelin Paladin. Also, before we move on, I want to thank 11th Hour Games for sponsoring this video, and if you want to buy Last Epoch, you can do that through my Nexus, which is linked below the video. So Holy Trail Javelin is, in my opinion, one of the easiest builds to start with, especially if you are a new player. The reason for that is because we play as a Sentinel, which has an easy access to a lot of defenses, like resistances and endurance. On top of that, Holy Trail provides a lot of healing, so you don't have to build that much defense with your gear, which is especially nice for new players. If you're interested in multiplayer, this build is also a very good choice, because Sentinel provides a lot of bonuses to players in your party, but more on that later. As the mastery for this build, I chose Paladin, because later I wanted to respec into Smite Hammerdin, which is also a Paladin, and I am gonna make a video about that build later. But if you are interested just in Holy Trail Javelin, you can play both as the Paladin or Void Knight, and you can just continue playing this build. You don't have to swap to anything. This build is capable of clearing everything in the endgame. So in the background you can see gameplay of the build, and the way you want to play it is you're gonna throw Javelin, which has few seconds cooldown, and it's gonna leave Holy Trail on the ground, which is gonna deal damage over time to enemies, and at the same time, if you stand in that fire, you're gonna heal yourself. Also, if you're gonna use a lunge, which is your mobility skill, it is also gonna throw Javelin, and it is gonna leave Holy Trail on the ground. So you have two sources of Holy Trail. And yes, they do stack. So if you throw Javelin and then lunge, and enemy is gonna stand in both of them, you're gonna deal double damage. For even higher mobility, I decided to use Shield Rush, which is basically a skill that lets you charge super fast until you hit a wall in a straight line. Unfortunately, it shares cooldown with Lunge, but if you don't need additional damage that Lunge provides with Holy Trail, just use Shield Rush to move much faster. If you need a little bit of damage, use Lunge instead. You don't need to use both of them, but I personally decided to use both. Now let's go over the characters, starting with skills. So the way you're gonna level this character is you're gonna choose a hammer throw, and you're gonna go at top, so 1, 2, then go to the left, so 3, 4, and then to the right, so 5, and all of the other points into the ballista. So you're gonna play with hammer throw probably until around level 20, then you're gonna take Javelin as your second skill, and you're gonna use both of these skills, but eventually damage of hammer throw is gonna fall off, and you're just gonna deal damage with Javelin. So for Javelin, you're gonna go to the right, take the Mighty Delivery, then Burning Strength, Spear to the thigh, and finally Holy Trail, which is your main damage dealing point. Then Path of Judgment, 4 points into Pilgrimage, and then all the way to the left to Strategic Patience for 50% increased damage. And then you're gonna take all of the remaining points like Mighty Delivery, and if you have some additional points, Serrated Javelin. So the way you're gonna deal damage is you're gonna throw Javelin, and it is gonna leave Holy Trail on the ground. And if you hold Alt, you actually can see all of the scaling tags. So Holy Trail is gonna deal damage over time on the ground, and the damage is half of it is fire and half of it is lightning. So the best way to scale it is through increased damage over time, elemental damage over time, or elemental damage and spell damage. If you scale just lightning or just fire damage, you're just gonna scale half of its damage. Also, once you take Path of Judgment, Holy Trail gains additional spell damage based on your increased healing effectiveness. And again, if you stand in Holy Trail, it is also healing you, so 25 healing per second. So now healing effectiveness scales both healing and damage. So healing effectiveness is actually the most important stat for this build. So then for the lunge, you're gonna go all the way to the right until you take Pilum Assault, which basically lets you throw additional Javelin whenever you use Launch. But to be able to proc this, you have to use Spear. So remember, when you're playing with this build, you always have to use Spear. For the other points, just go to the top. Unfortunately, right now, additional charge of launch doesn't work. So when I'm using launch, actually I can show it here. But whenever you use launch, you actually lose both of your charges. So you actually can't skip it for now. I just decided to leave it because, well, eventually it's gonna get fixed and you're gonna go for it. And then you can go to the left for the unstoppable and some additional healing. If you have some additional remaining points, Kulvo Weak is also nice, so you can kill enemies that are below 15% life. Then the next important skill is Holy Aura. So the way Holy Aura works is that it gives you passively 30% increased damage and 15% elemental resistances. And also you can activate, and when you do that for 4 seconds, it's gonna have double the effect. And also, if you take some additional points, they are also gonna be duplicated during that time. So the points you want to take for this build is the most important one is Redemption, which gives you 40% increased healing effectiveness, which again is the most important stat for Holy Trail. And to do that, you need 2 points in Vital Bone. Then you can take 1 point for Purification for some additional poison resist, and it's also gonna cleanse ailments whenever you use Holy Aura. Then to the left, you're gonna get some additional elemental resistances and endurance, and then to the right, some additional fire damage and fire penetration. Unfortunately, Javelin deals half fire and lightning damage, like I said earlier, so this is gonna have half of the effectiveness, so it's only gonna work for fire portion of the damage. If you are going to be playing in a party, you actually can choose a little bit different pathing. For example, you can go for Fanaticism, which gives you additional attack and cast speed. So if your party relies on attack and cast speed, this is a pretty good one. Also, True Strike is going to give additional critical strike chance, and Extreme Zeal also additional critical strike damage. So just see what your party members are playing, and depending on their playstyle, you might choose some different points in here. The next skill is Volatile Reversal, and this one is basically just to increase your damage over time. So whenever you're gonna use it, it's gonna just leave this AoE on the ground, it's gonna teleport you back a little bit. And to do that, you're gonna take Incipient Void Rift, which is gonna leave Void Rift where you were before using this skill, and Terminal Void Rift, and this is gonna leave Void Rift where you arrive. And thanks to the Time Rift, if you hit enemy with Void Rift, it's gonna take additional damage over time for 4 seconds, so 60% additional damage over time, which scales your Holy Trail. On top of that, a Harbinger of Dust is gonna increase overall damage taken by enemies by 30%, which again is very good for party play, because this is also gonna increase damage of your party member. And then to the top, some additional cooldown recovery, but it's no longer gonna restore your health, and Timeless Wisdom, even more cooldown recovery, but you're no longer gonna restore mana. If you want to restore mana or your health, feel free to not take these points, but I decided to go for it. You can go for something like Catching Up instead for some additional movement speed. And for your last point, last skill, I decided to go for Shield Rush. You actually can go for the Sigils of Hope, which is gonna be probably more damage and more recovery, but I decided to go for Shield Rush simply because I wanted better mobility. So again, if you want more damage, go for Sigils of Hope, and if you want mobility, go for Shield Rush. And the reason why I wanted to go for Shield Rush is because of Dark Rush. Thanks to this, Shield Rush no longer requires a shield. So normally, to be able to use Shield Rush, you need shield, but since we need to use Spear for Pilum Assault to work, so we have to use a Spear, so to be able to use a Shield Rush, we need this point. Everything else pretty much doesn't really matter. Rush Mastery is nice for reduced mana cost, protective speed for a little bit of damage reduction, and unstoppable charge for well, being able to stun your enemies. Everything else doesn't really matter. So that's it in terms of the points. Now let's go over the passives. So passives, the most important thing you have to remember is your tree is gonna look a little bit different than mine, because it's gonna depend a lot on your gear. Because with passives, you can basically fix your resistances. So for example, Juggernaut gives fire and void resistances, and I only took 1 point because I actually don't even need any void and fire resist. As you can see, I am way over capped. So I took only 1 point because I needed it to be able to take remaining points. So if you need these resistances, take it. If you don't, go for Fearless for additional vitality and health regen. Then Armor Clad is pretty good for some additional damage reduction, and Valiant Char for cooldown recovery, which is very good for your lunge. And that's basically it. You also are gonna probably need 1 Relentless. If you're gonna take some Juggernaut, you might not need this. So again, it is up to you which point you're gonna take, depending on your resistances. Everything else in Sentinel doesn't really do anything for us, so that's basically it. Then you actually need 5 points in Void Knight, so I decided to go for Abyssal Endurance, which is another good passive that gives you resistances, so 20% Void and 20% Physical, which again, as you can see here, I don't really need, but I needed to take them to be able to use Volatile Reversal. And then for the Paladin tree, you're gonna start with Conviction for basically a lot of damage, then Valor for healing effectiveness, which, like I said earlier, is the most important stat for us. Then Blinding Light for endurance, and you only want to take enough points to have endurance cap. And if you don't know, endurance cap is 60, so that's basically your aim. Holy Icon, you really don't want to get any necrotic resistance on your gear, because you really want to take Holy Icon just for healing effectiveness, but on top of that, it's also gonna give you necrotic res, which means you're not gonna need that much of it on your gear. Then Prayer for additional damage and healing. Then Faith Armor for increased armor, critical strike avoidance. And after that, you actually have a choice where you wanna go, either for additional damage and healing effectiveness, or for fire and lightning damage and some additional movement speed. So if you want to move faster, go here. If you want more damage, go here. So that's basically it. And the other remaining points that you might consider taking is Defiance, which is gonna give you some elemental resistances and attunements. And attunement actually is gonna scale your damage, because thanks to the Paladin mastery, which we're gonna take, attunement gives you increased healing effectiveness. But to be honest, it's not that much, so it's not like super important, but it is still pretty good if you need elemental resistances. So remember, Sentinel and Paladin passives are very good to fix your resistances if you need them. You can get more Void and Fizz res from the Void Knight. You can get more Fire and Void from the Juggernaut. And then in Paladin, elemental resistances and the necrotic, and endurance from Blinding Light. So the last thing I want to talk about is gear. So for your weapon, you want to equip Spear, and the most important stat is increased damage over time. So as you can see here, I just have tier 5 damage over time, and everything else doesn't really matter. But if you can, try to get the Judicator, which is gonna give you plus level to your Javelin and additional spell fire damage, cooldown recovery for Javelin, and healing effectiveness. So this is a pretty good weapon. But again, if you don't have it, just use a regular rare spear with increased damage over time. For the other pieces of gear, you want to get elemental damage over time and healing effectiveness on Amulet, both of your rings, and a relic. Unfortunately here I don't have that, but if you can get some fire or lightning damage, that's also pretty good. And here you can see also as a base, it gives me some additional healing effectiveness. On the belt, you can only get damage over time, so no healing effectiveness, but you can also get some additional cooldown recovery speed. Unfortunately, on the chest and the helmet, there is no damage modifiers, so just focus on defense here. So just additional health. Attunement is actually pretty good for damage, but you can also go for vitality and strength for some additional armor and health. The same thing for your helmet. For the boots and gloves, I decided to go for Timid Fate, which you can drop from Shade of Orobis, and Atrophy, which drops from the boss in the Black Sun timeline. So Timid Fate is just gonna give you additional cooldown recovery speed for your launch and also damage over time. The Atrophy gives just penetration for all resistances for damage over time, and some additional modifiers like slow duration and chance to slow attackers. If you can't get these, just go for a regular pair of boots with cooldown recovery and movement speed, and for the gloves, just get one with increased damage over time. For the idols, just get as much healing effectiveness as possible, and on top of that, just fix your resistances. But that shouldn't be that much of an issue. As you can see here, I am way overcapped. Last thing I want to do is I want to mention what kind of benefit you can provide to your party if you want to play with other people. So first of all, remember that when you're gonna throw your javelin, if you stay in fire, you're gonna heal yourself, but also your other party members heal themselves. So let them know that if they want to get additional healing, they should stay in that. On top of that, for your skills, I actually would probably swap Shield Rush for Sigils of Hope, because they actually give a lot of benefits to your party. For example, Empowering Sigil is gonna give additional damage to your allies. And in case you don't know how Sigils of Hope work, you're basically gonna use it. It's gonna last 15 seconds, and as long as you have them active, they are gonna give additional fire damage and healing regeneration to you and to your party members. But like I said, Empowering Sigils is gonna give them additional damage, Iron Sigils, additional endurance threshold. If you want to cast additional sigil, you can take Tetragram and Polygram. So if you take both of them, you're gonna be able to cast 5 sigils instead of 3. But make sure you don't take meditation, because if you take it, your sigils are only gonna affect you. For additional benefits, you can take Decree of Flame, which is gonna give you and your party members additional fire damage. If you play with someone that relies on Ignite, you can take a Burning Sign. And if you play with someone that deals Void damage, you can take Sigils of Despair, which is gonna convert the fire damage bonus to Void. Also Invigorate for additional healing effectiveness, which is very important for you, but it also is pretty good for your party members. And that's basically it. For your Holy Aura, basically most of the things that you are taking already for yourself are also gonna affect your party members. So things like additional elemental resistances and endurance, healing effectiveness, healing regeneration, poison resist, and additional fire damage and fire penetration if your party members are dealing fire damage. Fanaticism should be pretty good for almost any build, because it just gives attack and cast speed. And if your party members are dealing critical strikes, True Strike and Extreme Zeal are good for increased critical strike chance and critical strike damage. If your party members are dealing physical damage, you can take Call to Arms. And if they're using shield, you can take Mighty Shield for additional block effectiveness and health on block. And if they rely on Ward for the defenses, you can take Shielded by Faith and Against the Odds for some additional ward retention and ward on block. And also Face Reward just for some additional ward when you activate your Holy Aura. And the last thing you can do is you can take Lead the Charge, so that when you use launch, you're gonna give a haste buff to everyone in your party, and also to your aid. So now you can launch to your allies and Healing Crush, so that when you launch to them, you're gonna heal them. So that should cover everything you can do when you play in a party. And also, that's gonna be it for this video. So thanks for watching and see you next time.